everybody. Nancy McKay here again with another episode. And thank you for joining us today. Today I have again Ron Ben Joseph, who we had such a great time talking about misfortune last time that he's joining me again today. And today we're going to talk about resilience. Hey, Ron, how are you?
I'm doing really well, Nancy. Nancy, this is how are you doing? First of all,
I'm good. I
okay,
am good.
you are good. You are Mrs. Resilience. Is it Ms. or
Ms.
Mrs.?
Resilience to you,
Ms.
my friend.
That's right. You are Ms. Resilience. Like every time I hear your story, I'm just like floored by how much adversity you've experienced, how much you've gone through. Can you just walk us through? First of all, you as someone who is resilient, how do you define resilience? Like you personally, what's your definition or the dictionary definition of
Well,
resilience for you?
Webster's says resilience is the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And as I was joking with you before we started recording, I kind of feel like the queen of resilience. And that's not to brag, but I've been dealt a thing or two. I've been around the block a lot, and I'm still swinging. I'm still hanging in, and that's one of the things that's really necessary when you're building a business is resilience. I'm learning.
Yeah, I mean, we
So,
all have those months, right?
oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I have learned that being persistent and consistent and resilient is those are huge um, attributes and characteristics that are required when you're building a business. So when you're an
yeah,
entrepreneur.
it's so true. I mean, there's no way and there's so much beauty in entrepreneurship, but like you said, like it's like you are inviting when you're on your own like that, you are inviting adversity to come in and sometimes affect your bottom line or affect a lot of things, your
Oh,
personality.
absolutely. Yeah, you're inviting them to adversity to come in, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and get comfy. Because you deal with it all the time, and I've had times where I've had to really dig down deep and strengthen my resilient muscles, and I'm really glad that I've got them built the way they are. And that started when I was a kid. I grew up in an alcoholic household. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom drank a lot just to put up with him. And so I never knew what to expect. Um, when one day from the next, if they were going to be drinking, how they would be behaving when they drank. Would they be happy? Would they be angry? And so that starts to build those resilient muscles because things can change on a dime. So, I learned how to walk on eggshells. And because I was sensitive, I was always accused of being too sensitive. Um, but I'm not too sensitive. I'm just sensitive. And I take things personally and I take things to heart and things impact me deeply. And so, you learn how to be resilient when you're when things can change frequently.
Well, let's whittle that down. Like so again, you're in a very obviously you said it wasn't necessarily physically dangerous, but there is a danger.
No.
It's a dangerous environment, right?
Yeah,
How,
it's just it's uneasy. It's like now that you mention it, it's like this ride. I remember this. We both live in Colorado, but you didn't grow up here, so there is an amusement park. I think it's still in business called Lakeside, and they used to have this thing called the Fun House, and the Fun House had all different sorts of things in it that would challenge your um, challenge your ability not to throw up pretty much. But, there was like this cage that would spin and it had centrifugal force. And then there was this walkway that would just, you know, fall out from, underneath your feet. You just couldn't maintain your balance because you never knew if the floor was going to fall out from underneath you. And that's kind of what it was like. You just you couldn't depend on what looked stable to be stable. And that's the first time I've used that metaphor, because it just occurred to me that it was just that sort of, you never really knew if things were solid.
But didn't that in turn make you a better walker?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, it helped me learn how to balance, I guess, a little bit more. But it also, I think it also had something, it has something to do with trust as well. I wasn't able to really trust what I would find when I came home from school, or when as I got older with my high school friends, I was never sure what I would find when I came home from, like, for instance, I was on the gymnastics team. I would never know what I would find when I came home at 8 o'clock from a gymnastics meet, and it frequently depended on what day of the week it was. So, if it was on a Tuesday, things were fairly certain that they'd be sober. And if it was on a Friday, chances were really good that they would not be. And so learning how to adapt built that resilient muscle, but it also created a lack of trust.
So adaptation, yeah. I mean, and again, I don't mean to tread lightly here. This is like hard stuff as a kid. You have so much going on top of this fear. This notion of adaptation, I love. I had a coach tell me once, when I had really bad, I had experienced a really bad bout of anxiety and panic. It went into panic mode. She said the thing about it is adaptation is key. So she's like, if you've never learned to swim, I will never forget the story. She's like, if you never learn, for whatever reason, if you never learn to swim and you're on a boat and the boat starts to sink, she's like, your immediate impulse is not to die. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go
Yeah.
drown. So she's like, you have to adapt. You have to find something in the room, and whether it be like a door to float on or whatever. If doors float, even, I don't know. Like, you have to find something to float on. Something that will
Right.
keep you up and you don't have to swim. And I loved, and for me, that was such a hard concept to wrap my mind around, because for me, the idea of advocating for self and adapting to be more comfortable for myself was not something I had learned, and it was certainly not something that was intuitive to me, I guess. For me,
Right.
it was always make the other person comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So adaptation, I think, is such a powerful tool that, I don't know, I think, like, we say we become resilient. We don't say resilience happened to us. And I think the becoming is learning to adapt. So
Right.
how did you start seeing adaptation aid you and help you and move you forward? Let's say starting in high school, how did you start seeing that as a process of adaptation?
Well, and this may not be exactly where you're going, but a minute ago you brought up people pleasing. And so people pleasing was one way for me to adapt. If I made sure that I didn't make a wrong move, that would help me adapt. So I always tried to be um, respectful of my parents, even though I was mad as hell. I tried to hold that, I tried to stifle that feeling because it wasn't respected. Um, I was never taught to or encouraged to use my voice. I was never encouraged to voice my opinion or uh, expect respect. I guess, from my parents. You know, I was I was told that I was too loud, too, you know, I was too something all the time, you know, and loud was most of it. And so not only was I not encouraged to voice an opinion, I really wasn't encouraged to have an opinion. And if I did have an opinion, I was supposed to keep it to myself. So, um,
Isn't it
so
interesting how? Oh, sorry to cut you off.
go ahead.
Isn't it interesting how when we're told we're too something, we end up feeling not enough?
Yeah,
Like,
that is interesting. And yeah, absolutely. So as a result, then I had that feeling that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't valuable enough to voice my opinion with the people who are supposed to have your back, you know? And I know that this happens to a huge percentage of our population. You know, I think it's, you know, I think that happens to a lot of us where we are, you know, when we're growing up, we're not encouraged to express ourselves or um, do things differently than the norm. And you know, it's really a shame. And hopefully, as we're evolving, that you know, people are teaching their children a different way. And I know you've got a young daughter, and um, you know, she seems like she's so well adjusted, you know, because you encourage that in her. You know, you encourage her to be her. And, you
what's
know, it makes a difference.
it's so funny. I had a talk with my dad about this a few months ago, and he was just like, "Oh my God, she's amazing," and all this stuff, and he's like, "Where did she get this personality from?" And people on my co-parent side, on her mom's side, have said they're like, she looks like her mom, but she has the personality of her dad, like to the T. And so it's so funny when I tell my dad, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna let him know, not have it, but I'm gonna let him know. I was like, we have the same personality. When I'm on stage, which I don't invite you to shows, when I'm on stage, this is what you get. It's the exact same personality. So just so you know, and you know, I'm like, however, the difference is she's not yelled at. Like we don't stifle her, we don't scream at her all the time. Um, my dad, I remember when I was, oh, he told me this a few years ago when she was 3. He's like, I remember when you were this age, and I thought he was gonna go into like a really sweet story, and he's like, I remember there was this one time you were sitting in the living room and your toys were sprawled out, and I got so angry, I was gonna throw them all out, you know, and I'm like, I know, you know, you threatened to throw out my toys all the fucking time. And so, what did that teach me? Play small. Play, you know,
Yeah.
like playing is not a priority. Toys expanding, expansion is not a thing.
Yep.
Always keep it stifled, right? So
Yep.
with her, we made a conscious effort to be like, all right, we'll hold space for you to do you as long as you're safe, right?
Yeah.
But again, you know, we talked about this before we started recording. Is that there's as parents, of course, like we are trying, and I think there's a generation of parents that are what is it called, like not helicopter parents, but like, or maybe it is how, like where we're trying. I'd be literally, especially with this pandemic the past year, I'd be happy if she lived in a bubble, you know. But I don't
Sure.
think she would be, and I don't
Oh
think it's
yeah.
good for her.
Yeah.
And so I think you know, again, resilience. We learn we have to adapt to the stressors. We have to experience how the stressors make us feel and how what choices we can make to make our lives better. So at what
Exactly.
point did you shift? So I'm hearing you talk about adaptation as really just kind of getting through, right? You're like, I know my audience. I'm not going to stir waves. I'm just going to get the hell through this.
Yeah.
At what point did you start, like we talked about in the other episode we shot today about thriving? At what point did you start thriving where you made a shift? So you adapted and then shifted, truly shifted.
Um, that's a good question because I've had some moments, you know, before I got sober, years ago, before I was married, and I was living in the Pacific Northwest. I had moved there with a job in the oil and gas industry, another job in the oil and gas industry that I didn't like, that I, should have remembered how badly I felt about that before I got back into it. But that's another story. At any rate, I had enough of that inner wisdom that all coaches talk about, that we all have. And hopefully we all learn to listen to it. We all learn to hear it. There's the trick, is if we hear it and then cultivating the ability to listen to it, and then the ability to act on it. So I was unhappy in this job, and I finally had enough. So along with being resilient, I can be a little impulsive, which has saved me a number of times, I think. But because I'm impulsive, and I think that's also could be a character trait of alcoholics or people who are abusing alcohol. Sometimes things come up that you think that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And, maybe not. But at any rate, I came back from lunch one Friday afternoon and had lunch with a friend and was really weighing, when do I quit this job? And at some point during that conversation, I decided that today was the day that I was going to quit the job. And so I came back from lunch. I walked into my boss's office, who remains a friend to this day. And I said to her, I'm not sure if I typed out a resignation letter or if I just said, I'm quitting. And she said, when? And I looked at my watch. And she said, you're kidding, right? And I said, no. And she said, all right, well, I tell you what, you think on that for a minute. I'm going to go up and talk to HR and make sure that they're going to hire your ass back when you wake up and smell the coffee. And I said, okay. So off she went. I went into my office. I started packing things up, and she came back. She said, okay, so they will hire you back when you have come to your senses. And I said, I appreciate that, but it's not going to be necessary. And off I went. I had decided that I was going to go sell artwork on the Oregon coast. So the following Monday, I got in my car and I drove down the Oregon coast until I found a job. And I only made it a little way. And I found a job in an art gallery, and I loved it. Stayed there for 2 years and didn't come back to Denver until my mom got sick in 1991. So there's some adapting, resilience, and that independent kind of throwing caution to the wind. And yet it was that inner voice that I knew I was going to diminish my light if I stayed there. And that was a financially bad decision, but it was it was such an enriching experience for me that I wouldn't trade it for anything, not anything.
So it wasn't technically bad. It was a different
No, it
choice
was
financially.
great.
Yeah.
Financially, it was horrible.
What
You know,
happened financially? I have to
I,
ask.
I had, I filed for bankruptcy.
Oh, gotcha.
I went from making $35,000 a year to, $8.65 an hour, I think, or something ridiculous like that.
And that's in the
And,
80s, right?
yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So it was a long time ago. Um, and, the bankruptcy that didn't hurt me for long. It was that 7-year thing. And then I bounced back and, you know, bada boom, bada bing. But it showed me that I had a spine, number
Yeah.
one, that I had courage, and that I was resilient. And those are things that I carried through me when I came back to Denver, which I thought I would never do, but I found out that I would do it for my family. So that was enlightening to me. And that I was able to start over. And then when the job that I was hired to do when I came back, I got laid off a couple more times, and then I got laid off for the umpteenth time, and got to go back to school on the state's dime to learn interior design. So then I started over again, and I built more resilience, more muscles. And one of the things that I have found out that's a common thread through all of the different professions that I've had, and I've had a few of them, has been that I'm the person that people come to when they have a problem. And I've always been that person. Ever since I was a kid in elementary school, and friends would come, I was the confidant. I was the one that everybody could trust and everybody could talk to. And so it's interesting that it's not surprising to me that this is what I'm now doing for a living, is because that's kind of what I've always done. I've just really gotten better at it, and now I've got some really concrete tools that I use with people.
Well, and it sounds like you have a formula. Ultimately, thank you so much for sharing the story, because like there's so much to extract from that, and we can see a formula in how you go from adaptation to resilience, right? Because you help. For me, you help frame it around this idea that you were adapting first and foremost to survive, right?
Yeah.
So you're reading the room. You're like, I can't stir waves, like we said. Like I can't. I'm mad, but I can't let it out. So you learn how to cool the waters around you, in a sense, to then make the shift. Then it took you time to figure out, okay, once things are calm and I'm not in an immediate threat, I'm not in immediate danger, then I'm going to listen to intuition. I'm going to listen to that, like you said, the inner voice. Then, because you were like, hey, look, I figured out how to survive and how not to get, pummeled over or whatever, or how not to just be stopped in my tracks. I learned how to keep moving by leveling the waters. Then there was confidence there to go, hey, you know what? I can try things. I can try to move down the coast. And your intuition was so loud that it's like, you're going to find a job. You're going to find a job selling art. Like that seemed real for you. And then it was real. You manifested it. But I love that. I never thought about that. Adapting is really just leveling the playing field. And then so you're like, okay, I'm surviving. I'm okay right now. Thriving is the shift of listening to what's within, what your soul is asking for, your heart, your voice, whatever it is. And then taking the leap, going, I'm going to be okay because I learned how to adapt. I learned how to level things out and not be in danger.
Right.
What a cool formula.
Well, and they all build on each other. So, I did it before, I can do it again. And
because you're a survivor.
That came into play when when I got sober. That was something that I hadn't tried before, and I didn't I didn't really have anything to go by except that I had learned to kind of dig deep and listen to that inner voice. And I had ignored that inner voice for a long time. And I kept drinking and kept drinking and kept drinking until finally, you know, I pulled a stunt that, you know, one of those permanent solutions to a temporary problem. And it made me wake up. But I knew that that it was the thing that I had to do. That inner voice was saying, that's it. This is, you know, you've got to do this in order to save yourself. And so that was a survival instinct that kicked in. And then when I faced cancer, it was like, you know, you have done harder things than this, and you can do this. And so then, you know, and so all the things that I've been through in life have built that resilient muscle to the point where now, you know, it's like, well, of course I can do that. Of course I'm willing to try that. You know, I'm willing to embrace this because I know I can do it.
And this is huge. And thank you so much for sharing this and your transparency and vulnerability. I mean, this is there again. This is why I think people love working with you, is because you are so real and you've been around, like you said, you've been around many blocks. Like it's like you've experienced so much stuff and you figured out the way to get through it. What's kind of one last thought that you want to leave your listeners and your audience with, in terms of that they can succeed amidst adversity, they can become resilient. They can't make they can make resilience a practice. You know, what's like a final kind of thought you want to leave them with?
Well, I think if I can do it, so can you. You know, because you know, I mean, I'm all that in a bag of chips, but I'm nothing special, really. Um, you know, I didn't, you know, uh, I wasn't, well, I was brought up to be resilient because that's what created the resilience in me, was how I was brought up. But it wasn't like, um, you know, that wasn't part of the program, you know. But, but, you know, the fact of the matter remains that everything always comes back to mindset. And if you want to be different, if you want your life to be different, then it's up to you to change it. And you have to have the mindset that it's possible to do that. And you have to be willing to ask for help. So, and that's where I come in, or another coach. But um, you know, nobody gets through life all by themselves. We all need help. We all need, you know, the universe to help us and people to help us. And, you know, that's why I love doing what I'm doing, is because, you know, I'm helping people and I love helping people. So I guess that's it. Anything else?
No, that's it. That was beautiful. Yeah, like that was beautiful.
Well,
Thank you, Nancy.
you know, it really is. I truly feel like if I can build resilient muscles, anybody can. And because quite frankly, you know, I've never been able to do anything for any length of time up until recent history. And staying sober for 12 years, um, you know, I'll celebrate 12 years of sobriety next month. And that's, you know, doing that and being married for the length of time that I've been married. Those are the two things that I've done that's noteworthy for any length of time. and living, you know. But it's just, it's something that you work on. And I wouldn't have it any other way, you know. I'm really grateful to have had the experiences that I've had that have helped build that resilient muscle, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.